Good afternoon, friends. I'm Karen Herring, Associate Minister here at Unity Church-Unitarian, and I will be joined today in leading this service with the Reverend Ruth McKenzie, who is also a member of Unity Church here, a friend of Elizabeth's, and a colleague. And so I'm grateful for your company, Ruth. We welcome you to this memorial hour as we celebrate the life of Elizabeth Plankington Shippee and honor and mourn her death last January. At the time of Elizabeth's death last winter, while COVID restrictions were still in effect and prevented us from gathering in person, we held a beautiful online circle of remembrance, sharing stories about Elizabeth and the many ways she touched and brightened our lives. And I know many of you were there online. Now that the vaccine has made it possible for us to meet in person, we are holding this memorial service to let that circle of remembrance ripple out a little further, not replicating the full collage of voices that spoke then, but supplementing it. It is fitting that we gather here at Unity Church-Unitarian in St. Paul, Minnesota, now to do this, remembering our friend and dear one who called this place home, both this church and this community and this state. For almost 70 years, this was home to Elizabeth. And it is fitting that this service is now live streamed as well. For the many of you who are watching from homes near and far, because we are remembering one who always did what she could to meet, to welcome, and to stay in touch with others across geography. In her own humble and most hospitable way, Elizabeth would have been delighted to bring us together as we are today. So we gather for this time outside of time, made holy by our attention and our presence, the presence of community gathered in person and online, and by the presence of grief and loss, sitting side by side with love and life. We gather in gratitude for Elizabeth's life, giving voice to our sorrow, finding comfort in one another, even across the miles, and giving shape to the farewell that now finally must be said. As we do, we unveil a deeper knowing that the spirit of life rings out even in the silences of death, that love's embrace is larger than life and death both, that the seasons from which life springs circle over and over again, and that the heavy grief we feel today and have felt in these months since Elizabeth's death, in time may grow into tomorrow's hope. The breath of life and love eternally renewed as we continue on, carrying those we have loved and lost with us for the rest of our days. We light the chalice now for this sacred gathering in time, honoring a life well lived by Elizabeth Shippee, and celebrating the way she always used her own light to spark, to encourage, and to lift up the lights of others. Please rise now in body or in spirit and join me in singing Spirit of Life, and number 123 in your hymnals. Today, we turn toward, not away from, the absence we have known since Elizabeth's death last January. And we welcome the grief that comes as we do. Kenneth Patton once said this of grief's gifts, a message that seems true to the way that Elizabeth lived as well. None but the callous will make little of the sorrow we experience at the death of our beloved. There is no sure medicine for this ill. And those who love truly wish for none. We know our sorrow as the necessary price of the joy of love and relationship. The heavier our sorrow, the more has been that which is taken away. They who embrace and affirm life willingly invite sorrow as the risk taken in owning the fullness of life and companionship. We learn to possess our sorrows as the measure of our loves. We learn in this parting to dwell more constantly with the one who is gone, bringing her into ourselves as the companion of our silence and solitude, even as she was once our outward companion. The poignancy of these days in deepening us will draw us closer to her, never take her farther from us. Time will dull the pain, but even the medicine of time is not sure. The only final healing is to create our peace within ourselves by possessing our sorrows in our solitude, by possessing our memories and finding in them strength. Friends, in the midst of our grief, we also come face to face with the mystery of death itself. As humans, we cannot know what is beyond this life. We can imagine a release from suffering and all our human stumblings. We can witness in ourselves and all around us the power of love and, in time, the resilience of life. We can believe at the very core of our being that the great promises of life are not lies. Love and beauty, truth and virtue are lasting. And the goodness that was within Elizabeth will continue on as we who were graced and gifted by that goodness carry it with us and share it with others. So we learn from death the preciousness of life and the lasting nature of love that grows beyond it. And we ask grief to teach us, to name and honor what was good and unique in our loved one who has died, and to carry those values on, to live them out in the world as our true inheritance from her. Grief also awakens other old grief, earlier losses that you in this family have shared with one another, as well as the sorrows present for all of us in this particular time of pandemic. Do not be afraid of grief's return and lingering. Find your own ways of befriending it, and it will help you carry your departed loved ones with you in the years to come. Please join me now in a moment of silence, in tribute and in welcome to all our beloved ancestors waiting on the doorsteps of our hearts. And will you pray with me? Spirit of life, source of all being and promise of all our becoming. We give thanks for the life of Elizabeth Shippee, and we mourn her death. As we devote this time to naming a small sampling of her many gifts, may we not leave sorrow behind too quickly. May our hearts, now opened by grief, allow her gifts to find their own place in our lives, that we might carry Elizabeth's energy and creativity with us, allowing the possibilities of each day as well as its limitations to be present. Stepping toward and not away from the losses and the challenges that come, stepping up ourselves to work toward a better world for all, and stepping into relationships with others as we do. Just as Elizabeth stood by us and mentored and advocated for us and many more in the 100 years of her life, may we now do the same for others. Open our hearts today and always to these and other cherished blessings that Elizabeth shared so generously in her life and being. May it be so, and amen.
A poem by Mary Oliver in Blackwater Woods. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of ponds, and every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this: the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go.
Friends, as I mentioned earlier, the collage of voices that we typically put in our memorial services was actually held online in February. And it was a beautiful time of storytelling and memory sharing. So today we are just going to share with you a very few, just 2 of them from that time and a few more that came in after that. And then we will tell more stories in the eulogy.
From Zahra Key, a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom for nearly 30 years. Dear family and friends of Elizabeth Shippee, I write a memorial today on behalf of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in Minnesota, the Metro Branch. Mrs. Shippee was a very supportive member of our local chapter for more than 30 years. She showed a clear leadership on the executive committee by being instrumental for our monthly programs, for our membership on peace, environment, economic justice, and especially disarmament issues. Her leadership strengthened our connections with other non-governmental organizations that produced many multicultural programs. She shared her interpersonal and intercultural skills at our steering committee meetings that she hosted at her home graciously, time and time again. She brought us together as friends and co-workers to produce a variety of activities that we shared with our community. I saw Elizabeth for the first time at a field trip in Beijing 26 years ago. We both smiled at each other. As Mother Teresa very wisely stated, peace begins with a smile. Elizabeth, may you rest in peace.
From Unity member Lenny Seams. I met Elizabeth over 20 years ago in a writing class offered at Unity entitled Circling from Story to Sacred. Small in class size and intimate in subject, the deep sharing allowed me to bond with the others. These folks are still some of my closest people at Unity. Elizabeth was a redhead too, and we bonded on that as well. I treasure the photos she sent me of herself from her younger years. Over time, we corresponded through cards and letters, as well as hugs and checking in on Sundays. One day, my husband and I were entertaining friends in one of the dining rooms at Episcopal Church Homes, where both he and Elizabeth were living. She came into the dining area, and even though I had heard she had moved there, it was my first time seeing her there. I left our table to go and greet her, and I helped her get seated. We commiserated about what a maze the hallways were and how hard it was to find your way around. It was great to see her. As our table was finishing our meal, Elizabeth came back to the dining room and walked over to us. She had lost her cane. I got up to help her locate it. We couldn't find it, and I told her I would escort her to her apartment. She said my help wasn't necessary, and I was equally adamant that I would assist her. We started on our way, neither of us too sure about exactly where we were going. Luckily, we ran into a staff person who said, "I found your cane and brought it up to your apartment." It was my opportunity to confirm the room number and get more concrete directions. Elizabeth kept insisting she could go alone. She knew the way. I kept saying, "I need to make sure you get home safely." As we got closer to her room, she asked me my name. I told her, "Lenny." She said, "I have a friend named Lenny Seams." I could barely breathe. I was so overwhelmed with emotion. It was the first time in my life to experience being with someone who didn't remember who I was. And it meant more to me than anything that she knew Lenny was her friend. I keep thinking of a quote from Ram Dass. We are all just walking each other home. Thank you for allowing me that opportunity, dear friend.
From Ruth Stryker Gordon, I was with Elizabeth at her 100th birthday celebration as I tried to explain that the parade of cars was in her honor. She leaned over to me and said, "Oh my," as she realized it was all people from Unity Church. "Oh my," she said, "I will have to up my contribution."
From Unity member Barbie Byers, I'm saving a church name tag that says Elizabeth Shippee. She had church name tags tucked in many places. Unity was inside Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is deep inside each of us.
And this is my own remembrance. When I started seminary, I was desperately afraid of not being able to keep up academically. I'd not been to college for 30 years. I had dropped out after my sophomore year to follow my dream of becoming a singer. I didn't know if I had the right stuff at 48 years old to study, write papers, join classroom discussions in master-level classwork. Elizabeth did what she often did. She supported and nourished women in their academics and their dreams. There were so many afternoons that she and I would pore over my essays, and she would coach me on grammar and sentence structure. Elizabeth helped me find and strengthen my writing voice. Every time we met, she said in one way or another, "You can do this." If legacy is more than a plaque on a wall, if legacy is in fact more akin to energy, inspiring energy, then certainly your legacy is deep and wide, dear Elizabeth. The earth will miss you. I will miss you. But your energy is still here. Your energy is still circulating in the system of love and effort and justice-making, support and dreams for a world that is whole and good. I am so glad for the life of Elizabeth Shippee and so grateful that it intersected with mine.
Imagine a crossword puzzle made up entirely of questions about Elizabeth Plankinton Shippee. The words running across and up and down might read something like this: energetic, positive, feminist, trailblazer, mentor, advocate, adventuresome, socially engaged, devoted, determined, self-sufficient, curious, courageous, beautiful, self-deprecating, hilarious, thrifty, and generous. Elizabeth was a woman who loved words almost as much as she loved people. Often with a crossword puzzle in hand and eager for another Scrabble game at the family cabin on Star Island in Cass Lake or anywhere else. She memorized all the words with a Q that didn't require a U as a way to aid her game. And even in her final days, as her memory declined, she kept a list of new words she was learning just for the fun of it. Born to John and Elizabeth Plankington in Hilo, Hawaii in 1920 and raised in Portland, Oregon, she was the middle child between two brothers, Jack and Bob. Her childhood adventures in Oregon included many family excursions into the mountains and to the ocean, camping, hiking, and fostering what would become a lifelong love of water, of birds, of nature. For 13 years in her childhood and youth, she spent much of her summers at a camp run by the Campfire Girls, first as a camper and later as staff, enjoying what she would describe as a great antidote to being just a girl among males. She learned songs, crafts, horseback riding. She earned her junior life-saving rating in the Bull Run River, no small thing, and at 16 she became the camp postmistress, driving a Model T truck several miles to town when the camp mail was dropped off. This sense of adventure and trailblazing became a common theme in her 100-year life. She graduated from high school in 1938 and, following her mother's example, joined the relatively small number of women then attending and graduating from college before marrying. She majored in English at the University of Oregon, then moved east to Syracuse University, where she earned a master's degree in education and counseling in 1944. The world was at war, and upon graduating, she wanted to join the American Red Cross to serve overseas, but she was still too young. She applied instead for the Coast Guard Women's Reserve, called SPARS. When she and her friend Betty Whitehead took the admission tests, they were both told they had scored too high and wouldn't fit in. They signed up anyway, assuring people that they would fit in. Elizabeth served then on the East Coast for 2 years, becoming an officer, and in 1945, leading her platoon in the funeral procession for President Roosevelt. Late in life, she was featured in a documentary about women in the military during World War II, and you'll find a link to that documentary in your order of service today if you want to watch it at home, or we will also be showing it in the hallway right outside the parish hall during the reception. After her discharge in 1946, Elizabeth spent the next 5 years teaching and counseling at Binghamton College in Syracuse until heading back west, this time to California, to enroll in Stanford University to get a PhD in education. This might have been adventure enough. But before starting school, Elizabeth traveled to Europe, making the trip both ways there and back in a converted troop ship, the Marine Tiger, and then bicycling across Europe for 6 weeks. It was at Stanford that Elizabeth met Warner Shippee on a blind date, just as her own parents had met. In Warner, she found an introverted complement to her outgoing social self, and the two began a rich and warm relationship that lasted until 2005 when Warner died. They married in 1952, and 3 months later, Warner lost his job when his employer learned of his political involvements as a student. Elizabeth then left her PhD studies, and the two moved to the Twin Cities for a new job for Warner. In St. Paul, Elizabeth and Warner began their child-rearing years with the births of Susan and Dave. Their third child, Doug, was born in Pittsburgh, where Warner took another job for 4 years before the family moved back to the Twin Cities to stay. Warner had 2 older children, Lisa and John, from his previous marriage, and they too were a part of the family fold with visits to Minnesota and especially time at the family cabin on Cass Lake. The cabin, like Elizabeth herself, was a warm and welcoming place, a favorite place shared with family and friends alike. Elizabeth's high energy and curiosity carried her through the challenges of balancing the many demands at home and in her work life in a 20-year career at Metro State University, advising students and finally serving as acting vice president. It was there that her life touched so many young people as she went the extra mile to advise them, but also to mentor them with the kindness and the wisdom that was typical of her. She was an active leader here at Unity Church and in the community, and a passionate supporter of United Way, Planned Parenthood, school integration, the Equal Rights Amendment, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, as mentioned earlier, among many other organizations and causes. Her inclination to mentor and encourage others finding their way in the world grew from a commitment that seamlessly joined supporting individuals with addressing the conditions in the world that shaped the individual's opportunities and lives. At the age of 65, Elizabeth traveled to Nairobi, Kenya, to attend the Third World Conference on Women as part of the delegation from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And 10 years later, at the age of 75, she again represented the organization at the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing. You could call her tireless and devoted and determined and positive and courageous. She liked to quote one of her heroes, Margaret Mead, saying, "Freedom begins when we acknowledge what is possible and what is not." Nowhere did these attributes become more apparent than when several great losses struck the family in the 1980s and 90s. In 1986, her oldest son, Dave, a photojournalist, having inherited his mother's sense of adventure, was on a rafting expedition on the Yangtze River in China when he died suddenly of high-altitude pulmonary edema. The unexpected and long-distance loss left a lasting absence in the family, and perhaps in her own heart. But Elizabeth's response to it was to step closer, rather than moving away from it. Dave had been married just 4 years earlier, and Elizabeth convinced her daughter-in-law, Margit, to travel to China with her to retrace Dave's journey from the Himalayas to the Yangtze River to visit the place where he died. Yet a different tragedy came to the family when her adult daughter, Susan, was brutally attacked by a man she was living with at the time, leaving her in a long coma that she was not expected to survive. Elizabeth refused to accept that possibility, saying flatly, "You don't give up on your children." Sitting at Susan's bedside through the coma, she talked to her every day. And Susan has told me that she sometimes has dreams of being in a deep sleep and hearing her mother's voice, knowing now that that was her mother speaking to her through the coma. And when Susan regained consciousness, Elizabeth was both her caretaker and her coach through the long years of struggle and recovery from Susan's severe brain injuries. Helping her daughter again to become a fully participating member of society was something Susan did not only for Susan, but also for herself. As she once confided to the family during Susan's coma, "I don't think I will make it if Susie doesn't." About the same time, the family's beloved cabin on Star Island burned down. It was a loss not only of the place where the family shared their summers, but also of their history. Over 20 years of Elizabeth's journals burned with the cabin. And again, she did not let loss have the last word. She and Warner rebuilt the cabin, and she continued to visit it with Warner until his death in 2005, and with the wider family until the very last years of her life. Elizabeth was creative in the largest sense of the word, with writing, drawing, painting, and crafts of all kinds, as well as with her activism, but also with life itself. She knew how to receive what life brought her way and to reassemble it anew, to take the letters on her Scrabble tray and make of them good words, to rebuild, to recover, to restore. She had so many gifts and accomplishments, but an oversized ego was noticeably absent from her character. She was known for her self-deprecating humor. 10 years ago, she started what she called a mistake journal, because she said she seemed to be making noticeable mistakes more often. Practically every day, she wrote, things are lost or mislaid. But she added with her typical humor, "At least I know that is the case, and do not believe they're stolen as some of my neighbors think." No wonder she was loved and is now missed by so many, and was celebrated by such a long parade of cars on her 100th birthday last September, when we were unable to embrace her in person during COVID. She embraced life as it came to her, with an open heart and a willing spirit, ready to make more with it, to make more from it, to reach out to others, continually supporting, mentoring, encouraging, and asking little in return. As Elizabeth ended one of the essays she published in the Church's Journal of the Arts, there is so much more to tell. It is now our task to continue that telling, to take what she gave each one of us, to reassemble it with what life has brought us personally, to be thrifty, not wasting what we have, and generous in sharing it with others, to make new trails and invite others to join us in traveling them, to sit with one another through pain and losses, our own and theirs, to laugh easily, especially at our own foibles, to be curious, courageous, and to say, as she wrote at the end of a talk she once gave at Unity, offering her advice from her decade in the 80s, "I'm so glad to be alive and curious about what you are all thinking." You, her beloved family, are the first inheritors of her goodness and many, many gifts. How beautiful is the story of your scattering of her ashes last week on the north point of the island, late in the day. And the candles you then lit and floated on Windigo Lake in the middle of the island to the guitar music written for that occasion. And the island's own welcoming embrace of her spirit and yours as the candles went out and the darkness enfolded you, and Elizabeth's light carried within each one of you as together you traipsed back to the cabin in the dark, grieving but grateful, enjoying, as Elizabeth always did, the full adventure of life with its losses and loves both. Now, may we all join one another in that great adventure, and let us bring Elizabeth with us as we go. As the poet tells us, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing that your life depends on it, and when the time comes, to let it go, to let it go. Now, may the beauty of Elizabeth's spirit and life walk with us and within us. May her ready laughter ring in our ears, reminding us not to take ourselves too seriously. And may her determination, her love, and creativity encourage us to use the letters we've been given, to find new ways to make the words for love and justice, for peace and joy, for friendship and standing with one another. May it be so, and amen. I ask all of you to remain seated during the postlude. Ruth McKenzie will be singing a song that she also sang in Warner's memorial service. And then Ruth and I will usher the family out, and we ask the rest of you to follow after the family has left and join us in the parish hall for reception, to watch a slideshow of Elizabeth's life, to watch the movie, the documentary about her time in the Coast Guard Reserve, and to talk with one another.
Ah, could I lay me down in this tall grass, close my eyes and let the quiet wind blow over me. passing pleasant places. All my life I've looked back at loveliness and sighed. All my life over my shoulder I've looked at peace. Now I would gladly lie in this tall grass and close my Catbirds call, whippoorwills cry, drawing the twilight close. Eager vines wait on rocks, apple trees pause in their dance. Shady roads full of ferns, roses look and beckon. Only my heart, only my heart, only my heart, only my heart responds. Yet my path is sweet on either side. All through the dragging days, sharp underfoot and hot, but far, oh far as the passionate eye can reach. Long, oh long, as a rapturous eye can cling. The world is mine. Blue hill,